I was 63 years old when I realized my own son wanted me dead. Not in some vague, dramatic way. Not a metaphor. I mean, he actually wanted me gone, buried, cremated, whatever was cheaper, so he could get his hands on the house I'd spent 31 years paying off and the retirement account I'd been building since I was 26 years old, working double shifts at the County Water Authority. I know how that sounds, I know, but let me back up, because if I start there, you won't understand how a man like me, a man who coached Little League, who never missed a parent-teacher conference, who drove 4 hours each way every Thanksgiving just to sit at the same table as his family, could end up hiding in his neighbor's spare bedroom, watching his own home through a pair of binoculars, waiting to see what his son and daughter-in-law would do next. My name is Eugene. I was a pipe fitter for the city of Columbus for 34 years. I have a bad knee, a good dog named Biscuit, and until about 18 months ago, I had a son I would have taken a bullet for. His name is Corey. He's 37. When he was little, he used to fall asleep on my chest during football games, and I would just sit there, not moving, not changing the channel, just breathing slow so I wouldn't wake him up. I'd give anything to go back to those evenings and stay there a little longer. His wife's name is Simone. I want to be fair about Simone, because the truth is I never fully trusted her. And I have to be honest about whether that was intuition or just the stubborn jealousy of a father who didn't want to share his son. I think it was both. She was polished in a way that made me uncomfortable, always dressed up, always had the right answer, always smiled at exactly the right moment. My late wife, Audrey, used to say I was too hard on Simone. Audrey died in 2019. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After that, it was just me and Biscuit in the house on Caldwell Road. About a year after Audrey passed, Corey called and said he and Simone were having some financial trouble. He didn't go into details. He never went into details. But he asked if they could move in temporarily just until they got back on their feet. I said yes without hesitating. Of course I said yes. He was my son. They moved in that October with 3 carloads of boxes and a cat that Biscuit immediately hated. Within 2 weeks, the guest bedroom had become their bedroom, and I had quietly moved my office into the basement so they could have more space. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself it was temporary. 6 months passed. Then a year. I started noticing small things. My filing cabinet had been moved. Not a lot, just a few inches. But I'm a precise man by habit, and I knew where I left things. One afternoon I went to find my insurance documents, and the folder was out of order in a way it hadn't been before. I mentioned it to Corey. He said he hadn't touched anything. Simone smiled and said maybe I'd moved it myself and forgotten. Then I started getting dizzy. Not dramatically. Not collapsing in the hallway. Just this low-grade, persistent dizziness that made the mornings hard. My appetite dropped off. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart hammering and not know why. My doctor ran blood work and said my kidney function had dipped slightly and that I should watch my sodium. She adjusted one of my blood pressure medications and sent me home. I felt better for about a week. Then it started again. I didn't connect any of this to Corey and Simone at first. Why would I? These were the 2 people who were living in my house, eating dinner with me 3 nights a week, watching Jeopardy with me on Tuesdays. Corey would ask how I was feeling. He seemed concerned. Simone started making my morning coffee without being asked, which I thought was a kind gesture. I know how it sounds now. The thing that changed everything was a Tuesday afternoon in late February. I came home earlier than expected from my doctor's appointment. She'd had a cancellation before me, and I was in and out in 20 minutes instead of an hour and a half. When I pulled into the driveway, Simone's car was there. But the house was quiet. I came in through the side door and heard her on the phone in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I stopped because I didn't want to interrupt, and then I heard her say my name. She said, "He's not going to last much longer if we stay consistent." I stood in the hallway with my coat still on and my keys in my hand, and I didn't move for a long time. Corey's already talked to the estate attorney. The deed transfer just needs his signature, and once he's too far gone to manage his own affairs, we petition for guardianship. It's not complicated. A pause. He trusts Corey completely, that's the whole point. She laughed at something the other person said. Then I heard the coffee maker click, and I walked back out the side door the same way I came in, got in my car, and drove to the Walgreens 2 miles away and sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes. "I want to tell you," I cried. I didn't. I think I was too shocked to cry. I just sat there with the heater running and Biscuit's old leash on the passenger seat that I kept forgetting to move, and I thought about every time Simone had made my morning coffee, about the filing cabinet, about the dizziness that came and went in waves, about the fact that my son knew about an estate attorney and hadn't mentioned it to me. I called my neighbor Harold. Not my son, not the police. Harold. Harold Simmons is 71 years old and the most straightforward man I have ever met in my life. He was a high school chemistry teacher for 38 years. When Audrey was sick, he mowed my lawn every week for 6 months without ever asking or announcing it. He just did it. I've trusted him with a spare key to my house since 2007. I told him what I'd heard. All of it. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Eugene, I need you to come over here right now." I did. We sat at his kitchen table, and he asked me to walk him through every symptom I'd had over the past several months. The dizziness, the nausea, the heart palpitations, the way my hands had been shaking in the mornings. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just listened carefully and then said very quietly, "You need to stop drinking anything that was prepared for you in that house." I looked at him. He said, "I'm not diagnosing anything, but those symptoms over that timeline are not random, and I think you already know that." I did know that. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud yet. That night, we came up with a plan. It wasn't a dramatic plan. No cameras or confrontations, not yet. Step 1 was simple. I needed to find out how far this had already gone. Harold suggested I talk to my own attorney before I did anything else. My doctor had a colleague who specialized in occupational toxicology, and Harold thought I should get a more thorough workup than what my primary care doctor had ordered. And before any of that, I needed to understand what, exactly, Corey and Simone thought they were getting. I called my attorney the next morning from Harold's kitchen. His name is Philip, and I'd used him for every legal matter since I bought the house in 1993. I told him I had reason to believe someone was attempting to fraudulently obtain power of attorney over my affairs and potentially transfer my property without my consent. I didn't tell him it was my son. Not yet. I just told him I needed to know exactly what my estate documents said and whether anything had been filed or initiated without my knowledge. Philip called me back that afternoon. He said nothing had been filed yet, but he'd found something that concerned him. 3 weeks earlier, someone had contacted his office requesting copies of my original property deed and the terms of my living trust. The request had been made in writing, signed by Corey, citing a need for estate planning purposes on behalf of his father. Philip had sent the documents because Corey was listed as a secondary contact on my file, and the request had seemed routine. I sat with that for a while. Then I made a decision that I think was the right one, even though it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I told Philip I wanted to update my estate documents immediately, and that I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't obvious. not a dramatic revocation, nothing that would set off alarms, just quiet, careful adjustments. New beneficiary designations, a revised medical directive, and a new clause naming Harold as my emergency legal contact in place of Corey. Philip said he could have the revisions ready in 4 days. Then I went to see the toxicologist Harold had recommended. Dr. Nwakukwu was a quiet, precise woman who had spent 15 years working with the EPA before going into private practice. She ordered a full heavy metals panel and a comprehensive metabolic panel, and she asked me to bring in any supplements or medications I was taking. I also brought her the coffee I'd made myself that morning, a sample I'd collected from the bag in the kitchen, sealed in a small jar, Harold's suggestion. She called me 5 days later. Her voice was careful when she said she'd found elevated chromium levels in my blood work, not acutely dangerous, but significantly above normal. She wanted to know if I had any occupational exposure. I told her I'd been retired for 3 years and hadn't worked around any industrial chemicals in over a decade. She said she wanted to run the coffee sample. I said, okay. While I was waiting, I made my move. I told Corey and Simone that my friend from the Water Authority, a man named Dale, had invited me to his cabin in West Virginia for a fishing trip, a week, maybe 10 days. I said it casually over dinner, the same way I might mention I needed to pick up more dog food. Corey said that sounded great. Simone asked if I needed help packing. I said no thanks. I packed a bag, loaded biscuit into the truck, drove to Harold's house 2 streets over, and parked in his garage. I had installed 3 small cameras in my house the week before. Harold's nephew helped me. He does home security installations for a living, and he came over on a Thursday morning while Corey and Simone were both at work. We put one in the living room, positioned in a bookshelf, one in the hallway outside my bedroom, one in the kitchen, nested behind the paper towel holder where the angle caught both the counter and the back door. Harold and I watched the feeds from his laptop. The first day was quiet. Corey came home from work. Simone made dinner. They watched TV. They went to bed. I almost felt foolish. The second day, a man I'd never seen before came to the house in the late afternoon. He was younger, maybe late 40s, carrying a leather portfolio. Corey let him in. They sat at my kitchen table where I'd had breakfast with my kids every single morning of their childhoods, and I watched Corey spread out what looked like documents. The man with the portfolio pointed at things. Corey nodded. Simone brought them coffee and stood behind Corey with her hand on his shoulder. The conversation lasted just under 2 hours. When the man left, Simone hugged Corey in the kitchen doorway and said something I couldn't hear. He nodded and rubbed his face with both hands the way he used to do as a teenager when he was stressed. I recognized that gesture. I'd watched him do it over failed math tests and lost baseball games and the breakup with his high school girlfriend. I'd always wanted to fix whatever was causing it. This time, I just watched and took notes. Harold wrote down the license plate of the man's car. His nephew ran it the next day through a contact he had. The car was registered to a business, a real estate investment LLC, out of Dublin, Ohio. I called Philip. I also called my daughter-in-law's sister, a woman named Vera, who I'd always gotten along with and who, I suspected, was not entirely comfortable with what her sister was doing. This was a risk. I want to be honest about that. Vera could have called Simone and warned her. She didn't. Instead, she met me at a Panera Bread in Westerville and sat across from me with her hands folded and told me very carefully that she'd been worried about Simone for over a year. She said Simone had been talking about the house, my house, as an investment. She said Corey seemed to believe he was protecting me, that Simone had convinced him I was declining mentally and that getting ahead of it was the responsible thing to do. I asked Vera if she knew about the medication. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "What medication?" I told her what Dr. Nwakukwu had found. She left that Panera Bread about 20 minutes later, and I could see by the way she walked to her car that something had shifted in her. I didn't know yet what she would do with what I'd told her. I hoped I'd made the right call. 3 days later, Dr. Nwakukwu called about the coffee sample. She found chromium concentrations well above what would naturally occur in ground coffee. She told me the compound was consistent with chromium picolinate, a supplement sold legally in most health food stores, and that in low sustained doses over several months it could produce exactly the symptoms I'd been experiencing, particularly in someone with my existing kidney condition. She said she was required to report her findings given the circumstances. I told her I understood. I told her I already had an attorney involved. That same afternoon, I called Detective Harmon at the Columbus Police Department. I'd gotten his name through Philip. I laid out everything. The timeline of my symptoms, the toxicology results, the camera footage, the real estate LLC, the estate documents Corey had requested without my consent. I told him about Vera. Detective Harmon was quiet for most of it. At the end he said, "Mr. Eugene, I want you to sit tight and let us take the next step." I said, "How long?" He said, "Give me 72 hours." I gave him 72 hours. On the fourth morning after that phone call, I was sitting in Harold's kitchen eating toast when my phone rang. It was Detective Harmon. He said they were at my house. He said Corey and Simone were being detained for questioning. He said he thought I should come home. I drove the 2 blocks slowly. There were 2 police cruisers and an unmarked car in my driveway. The front door was open. My neighbor across the street, a woman named Louise, who's lived there since before my kids were born, was standing on her porch with her arms crossed, watching. I parked and walked up the driveway, and Detective Harmon met me at the door. He shook my hand. He said, "I'm sorry this is happening to you." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say much. Corey was sitting in the back of one of the cruisers. I could see him through the window. He didn't look angry or defiant. He looked exactly the way he used to look after I'd catch him in a lie as a kid. That hollow, exhausted shame. He knew I could see him, and he didn't look away, and I didn't either, for probably 10 seconds, and then I went inside my house. Simone was in the living room with Detective Harmon's partner. She looked at me when I walked in, and for the first time in 2 years, the careful, managed expression was gone. She just looked scared. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. I want to be honest about that too. I just felt tired. The man with the leather portfolio turned out to be a real estate broker who had been told by Corey and Simone that the property was going to be available for sale within the next 6 to 12 months. He wasn't charged with anything. He'd had no knowledge of what was happening to me, and when detectives questioned him, he cooperated fully. He seemed genuinely horrified. The chromium picolinate had been purchased by Simone at a nutrition store in Eastern Town Center, paid for in cash. The receipt was on her phone. She looked up the dosage protocols on a browser she thought she'd cleared. She hadn't cleared it fully. Corey told detectives in his statement that he hadn't known about the poisoning, that he believed I was naturally declining, that Simone had framed the entire thing as protecting me, getting ahead of a situation that was going to happen anyway, making sure the family was prepared. I don't know how much of that I believe. I've thought about it a lot. I've thought about the way he sat at my kitchen table with that real estate broker and nodded along. I've thought about whether a man who truly believed he was protecting his father would do that without asking his father. I've thought about 37 years of Little League and Thanksgiving drives and falling asleep on my chest, and then I've thought about him knowing, on some level knowing that his wife was doing something to me, and choosing not to ask the question that would have forced him to confront the answer. I think that's what haunts me most, not the malice. I can understand malice, in a dark way. What I can't understand is the choice to look away. Simone was charged with criminal poisoning and felony financial fraud. She took a plea deal, 7 years, with the possibility of parole after 4. Her attorney argued that she'd acted out of financial desperation. They had significant debt I hadn't known about. And Simone had convinced herself she was simply accelerating an inheritance that was coming anyway. The judge did not find this compelling. Corey was charged with conspiracy and financial fraud. His public defender negotiated a lesser sentence: 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and full restitution of legal fees. The judge was harder on Simone than on Corey, which some people might think was fair and others might think let him off too easily. I'm honestly still deciding what I think. What I know is this: I did not go to Corey's sentencing. I sent a letter through Philip. I said that I hoped the counseling would help him understand what he'd allowed to happen. I said I wasn't ready to talk yet, and I didn't know if I ever would be. I said I still loved him because I do. I don't know what to do with that love, but it's still there, sitting in my chest like a stone I can't put down or carry comfortably. The house is mine. The deed is in my name alone, and a copy of the updated estate documents is in a fireproof safe that Harold has a key to and Corey does not. I had the kitchen repainted last spring, a warm yellow that Audrey always wanted, and I'd always vetoed because I thought it would be too bright. She was right. It's not too bright at all. It makes the mornings feel different in there. Better. Biscuit is doing fine. He's 11 now, which is old for a lab, and he sleeps a lot. But he still gets up for our walks, and on good mornings he acts like a puppy for about 30 seconds before remembering he's an old dog. I understand that feeling. I've been going to a support group for elder financial abuse survivors on Tuesday evenings at a church in Clintonville. The first time I went, I sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes telling myself I didn't need it. Then I went in. The people in that room have stories that make mine look mild, and also stories that make mine feel less lonely. Both things are true at once. A woman named Charlene, who is 74 and sharper than anyone I've ever met, said something on my 3rd night there that I've been carrying with me ever since. She said, "The hardest part isn't that they did it. The hardest part isn't that they did it. The hardest part is that you knew them. You built something with them, and you have to figure out how to keep being yourself after someone used who you are against you. I'm still figuring that out. But I'm still here, which is more than they planned for. I'm still waking up in my own house, still taking Biscuit out past the oak tree at the end of the block, still drinking coffee I made myself. The mornings are mine again. That's enough. For now, that's enough. For now, that's enough. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a cosmic sense. I'm not a man who leans on that kind of thinking. More in the plain, practical sense that every choice has a weight to it, and that weight goes somewhere. It doesn't disappear just because you look away from it. Simone made choices, small ones at first probably, a calculation here, a shortcut there, and then at some point those small choices had their own momentum, and she was making bigger ones. Walking into a nutrition store, paying cash, coming home and making my morning coffee with a smile on her face. Each one of those choices carried a weight she apparently decided she could live with. The end result was 7 years, with the possibility of parole after 4. I don't think she ever seriously considered that outcome when she was standing in that store. People rarely do. Corey made choices too. His were quieter. And in some ways that's what I find harder to sit with. He chose to believe what was convenient. He chose to ask questions that had acceptable answers and avoid the ones that didn't. There's a kind of intelligence that knows exactly how much it doesn't want to know, and Corey had that in abundance. 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, 200 hours of community service. I think the hardest part of that sentence for him won't be the community service hours. It'll be sitting in a room with a counselor twice a month and eventually running out of ways to frame what he did as something other than what it was. I made choices too. I want to be clear about that. I chose to let things drift for too long. The filing cabinet that moved, the symptoms I explained away, the months of dinners where I noticed things and said nothing because saying something meant blowing up a version of family life I was still hoping to salvage. That passivity cost me. It nearly cost me everything. And I've had to be honest with myself about the fact that I am not purely a victim in this story. I am also a man who saw the smoke and kept telling himself it was probably just fog. What saved me in the end wasn't luck. It was the moment I stopped being passive and started thinking. The moment I walked back out that side door with my keys in my hand and drove to that Walgreens parking lot and sat there and actually let myself see what I had heard. That was a choice, a hard one, because once you see something clearly, you own it. You can't put it back. Harold has said to me more than once that the smartest thing I did was not to confront Corey and Simone directly. He's right. Anger would have felt better in the short term. It also would have warned them, and warning them would have given Simone time to clean up exactly the kind of evidence that eventually put her in front of a judge. There's a real difference between feeling strong and being effective, and at 63 years old, in the worst situation of my life, I finally understood that difference in my bones. I think about the people in that Tuesday night group in Clintonville. People who lost everything. People whose families cleaned out bank accounts, forged signatures, sold property out from under them while they were in the hospital. The thing that strikes me every single time I sit in that circle is how decent these people are, how trusting they were, how that trust was the exact quality that got turned against them. There is something deeply wrong with a world where a person's love becomes the weapon used to harm them. But here's what I also know. I am still here. My house has yellow walls in the kitchen now. Biscuit still gets up for his walks. I still know where my documents are, and who has the key to my safe, and exactly what my life is worth. Not in dollars, but in mornings. In the smell of coffee I made myself, in the particular quiet of a Tuesday evening when I choose to go somewhere and sit with people who understand, and let that be enough. That's what I came back to. That's what they couldn't take.